From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. Brazil's top electoral court is discussing jailed former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's eligibility to run in October's presidential elections. At the last minute, the court added his case to the agenda of the special session. The vote on his registration was to take place between September 7th and 13th. The court could try to ban him from running based on the fact that his guilty verdict has been upheld on his first appeal. However, Lula has received backing from the UN Human Rights Committee. It ruled that he cannot be disqualified from the elections because his legal appeals are ongoing. Lula Workers' Party released a statement condemning the last-minute action by the court. It says that Lula's defense submitted a 200-page report containing evidence and arguments to the court last night. They said it's not possible that it had been read by the judges with due attention, given the lack of obvious time for them to do so. And meanwhile, thousands of Lula supporters took to the streets in order to show their support for the former president. Candidate for the vice presidency, Fernando Haddad, led the march. Other Lula supporters await outside the prison where Lula has been jailed as the court decides his fate.
Just moments ago, the Supreme Electoral Tribunal started voting on the possible participation of Lula da Silva as a presidential candidate. On August 15th, there was a mass mobilization of social organizations, led by the Workers' Party, towards the city of Brasilia. Luis Barroso, the Minister of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, has already presented his report. He stated that he didn't have much time to make it after the voting was rescheduled to an earlier date. This was an extraordinary voting session organized by the President of the Tribunal. Nonetheless, the minister was able to present his report, in which he quoted the statement of the UN's Human Rights Commission, the same that demands from the Brazilian state to grant Lula da Silva's right to participate as a candidate in the presidential elections in the exact same conditions as the other contenders. They also asked to allow him to participate in the public electoral debates. Right now, Lula's lawyers and the Workers' Party are saying that this rescheduling of the voting session was part of a plan to prevent Lula from participating in the electoral process, and specifically in the electoral promotion and advertising, which is basically what defines the electoral panorama before the actual elections. The Workers' Party is fighting for Lula to be present in the TV promotion and advertising, which the conservative groups of Brazil are trying to prevent. Lula's lawyers are asking to delay the session until all the 181 pages of the report are read and analyzed. We still don't know which will be the end of this. We only know that Luis Barroso presented his report, saying that there is a dispute on whether or not the candidate with the greatest popularity rates, Lula da Silva, will be able to participate in the coming elections. Lula has 20 points of difference from the other contenders. This number has been the same since the beginning of the polls in Brazil. Whatever happens today in the Supreme Electoral Tribunal will define the future of the Workers' Party. Let's remember that if Lula can't participate, then Fernando Haddad will be the Workers' Party's candidate. Haddad asked the people to be patient and to wait for the results on this session. He and Manuela Davila are representing this party during the already ongoing campaigns, while Lula remains in the federal prison of Curitiba.
Thank you, Nacho, for your report. And political tensions in Brazil are on the rise. Supporters of left-wing candidates are being threatened with violence by members of the far right. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Nacho Lemos, has the story.
At 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, a member of left-wing presidential candidate Guillermo Boulos' campaign was talking on the phone outside campaign headquarters when a car stopped next to her and a man inside shouted, "Screw Boulos, here we support Bolsonaro." "Was that fascist?" asked the campaign member, and that's when the man pointed a gun at her. A complaint was filed and the perpetrator's license plate recorded with the police in São Paulo's Pinheiros neighborhood.
Uma proteção especial, então uma ameaça feita.
Campaign committee members, especially those working for presidential candidates, have a special protection under Brazilian law. So a threat of this magnitude against them is a very serious issue.
Então, isso torna a situação mais grave.
In addition to this, 2018 has seen a rise in violent attacks against members of the left wing. A few months ago, buses in the Lula caravan were fired upon by unknown assailants. Human rights activist and councilwoman Marielle Franco was assassinated, and recently, councilwoman Taliria Petrone had her campaign material seized by a policeman who also pointed a gun at her. All of the attacks were against figures of the Brazilian left wing.
Bolsonaro has all the political responsibility for this attack. He has encouraged the use of firearms. He takes the hands of children and have them do gun gestures, normalizing these actions. The seeds of Bolsonaro, planted so long ago, are being harvested today.
Both neoliberal candidate Geraldo Alckmin and far-right Jair Bolsonaro advocate for the free use of weapons. This in a country that reached a record 62,500 homicides in 2016, the same year of the parliamentary coup against then-President Dilma Rousseff.
And Ecuadorians will have no constitutional court for 60 days or until the council appoints new justices. The Transitory Citizen Participation and Social Control Council ratified its decision to dismiss the 9 justices after denying a request to review the decision. According to the council, the decision was made on the basis that in 2012, the court made rulings that favored former President Rafael Correa. Denise Herrera is in Quito and has more.
Hello, yes, indeed. The Citizens Participation and Social Control Council has ratified this, the decision to seize the 9 judges of the Constitutional Court of Ecuador. This decision was taken unanimously, and the court now enters into a constitutional vacancy for 60 days, while the new and final judges are appointed. Also, the council decided that will be no transitory judge, and also this decision was taken because the council decided and considered the irregularity in its appointment, and also they consider the judges were close to the former government. Some critics argue this decision taken by the council, that the council doesn't have the real power to dismiss the judges, and also some critics argue that it lacks legitimacy because these councils were appointed by the government, the current government. So now, for now, Ecuador doesn't have a constitutional court. That is all for now. We will keep you posted with more information as soon as we can. Back to you at the studio.
Thank you, Denise, for your information. And North American Free Trade Agreement talks have broken off without a deal, but will resume next week. The talks have been constructive, but Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland said that the government will defend the country's interest in any NAFTA deal. Her counterpart from the U.S. said President Trump intends to sign a trade agreement with Mexico and Canada if it is willing 90 days from now. Argentina's peso has bounced back slightly on Friday. The central bank auctioned $250 million in dollar reserves, causing the swing. Also helping it along, the International Monetary Fund issued a strong statement of support for President Mauricio Macri's government. And the finance minister is going to Washington to meet the International Monetary Fund authorities to discuss the matter.
We understand there is an ongoing distrust in the Argentinian economy. In our opinion, it is built on solid foundations, but we also recognize today that it has to be reinforced against the financial shock we have been exposed to.
It's thought the IMF could demand swifter cuts in spending as a condition for releasing its funds early. On Thursday evening, thousands of teachers, workers, and students from Argentina's public universities protested against the government's austerity measures.
Members of over 57 public universities are demanding a decent wage increase as they march against the budget crisis. After a 72-hour strike, protesters gathered outside the National Congress.
There is no state policy in place for public education. In a meeting addressing higher education and honouring 100 years of university reform, public education was, again, declared a universal human right and a state obligation. The state must support public education from primary school up to university.
Some of the demands are inflation-based salary increases, regularization of hired teachers and ad honorem teachers, a teachers training fund, and increased public university budget.
People are protesting against the crisis being faced by the science and technology as well as university sectors. Today, specifically, is the crisis of the National University, which is reflected in teachers' salary cuts, which the government aim to slash by 15%.
Since February, teachers are refusing to accept insecure agreements made during negotiations with the provincial and national governments.
Students are spreading the strikes and discussing the continuation of the demonstrations. They are in a major disagreement with the government. A government that continues with meetings but without hearing the general complaints. A government that does not give answers and says the only possibility is to make cuts, which will lead to the closing of the public university.
Mauricio Macri's government is plunging into a deep crisis and does not want to accept it. Supposedly in the next few hours, the unions will meet with the Education Minister Alejandro Finocchiaro, but the unions are not optimistic that their complaints will be heard.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
Uprzejmie zapytujemy, kiedy pan minister opracuje normy zanieczyszczeń dla środowiska odnośnie zanieczyszczeń kazanych.
Ja chcę czyste powietrze, żeby nie śmierdziało, żeby moja wnusia żyła w czystym powietrzu, zdrowo, tak? Żeby mogła żyć naprawdę zgodnie z przyrodą.
Telesur Documentaries presents Big Business, Negligent Conditions Behind the Food Industry and the Indifference of Authorities. Sunday, only on Telesur.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. A new group of Venezuelan migrants have been repatriated by the government through the Homeland Return Plan.
Entering the town of Roraima, Brazil, the first thing anyone sees is refugee tents set up by the Brazilian army for Venezuelan migrants. They appear to be a sign of fraternity, a welcome for those coming into the country.
They offer to give us documents to give us legal residence so we may work. They tell us the country's doing well, but once we arrive, the work we are offered is to mow lawns, to do infinite menial work that we don't even know how to do. We are all professionals. We are out of our depth.
Moving on to Boa Vista, the capital of Roraima, the reality of migrants became apparent.
There is no work to be found. And where you can find something, they pay you less than the good Brazilians. They want to trade us as slaves. We came here believing lies, that everything was great, that there was work, that life was easier.
They came to Venezuela morally bruised.
This was an unforgettable experience. We are closing the door on a bad experience. There is no work to be found. I used to be a mechanic in Venezuela. I had a house. In Brazil, I found no work. I lived on the street.
Most of them who migrated come from humble backgrounds and were greatly affected by the economic crisis. But crossing the border, things were worse.
The image that was painted for us about Boa Vista was completely different from reality. We went hungry, which we never experienced back in Venezuela. We couldn't find anything to eat over there. I don't recommend migrating to anyone.
We faced reality when we arrived to Boa Vista. We were attacked by the police. We were mistreated by the people. Our water was cut off. Our basic services.
They trusted in the Brazilian government's supposed solidarity.
They are manipulating the migration issues so that the people continue to flee Venezuela. I know many people who regret ever leaving, who want to go back but can't find a way. They are sleeping on the streets. Some people living in tents were recently attacked by a group of xenophobes who tried to burn them alive.
These migrants warn about the business of migration.
The government receives aid from Venezuelans. The UN gives them funds for us, so the more people that arrive, the more money the Brazilian government gets. But we never see those funds. We live in tents that are taken down before UN observers arrive, because we are supposed to be given proper refuge. But nobody cares.
Now they are back in Venezuela.
I want to welcome you all back to your country, to the land of Simón Bolívar.
185 migrants were repatriated and provided aid by the Venezuelan government. They were then transported to their own states. About 1,230 migrants have come back from Brazil, thanks to the Homeland Return Plan.
And Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro says he will keep his promise to deliver on the economic recovery plan.
Over the past 10 days, we have seen that we are on the right track. We will push forward until we stabilize our economy, until production is up and the market recovers. Maintaining fair wages, a decent income, is key for our economic plan. I can confidently say that we are doing well and we will only do better.
Bolivian President Evo Morales has announced that his country's representative to the International Court of Justice in The Hague submitted a counter-memorial to a lawsuit filed by Chile. This relates to a decades-old dispute over whether Chile has the right to use a river that crosses their shared border. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has more.
Bolivia has petitioned the International Court to force Chile to grant Bolivia direct access to the Pacific Ocean. It's a dispute that dates back decades. Also, back in 2016, Chile made the same legal bid. Now Bolivia wants a corridor to the sea to boost its exports of natural gas and minerals. Chile argues Bolivia already has access on favorable terms. Both countries have legal petitions before the courts. Judges will deliberate for several months before setting the date for a ruling.
Thank you, Freddie, for your report. And Cuba continues to debate on its new proposed constitution.
The proposed constitution will recognize market economics, but Cuba's economy grew less than expected in the first half of 2018 amid an ongoing liquidity crisis. Many want the government to raise salaries, like Maritza Basayo. She works at the popular Cohiba cigar factory in Havana.
I think that it must focus on a fair distribution of wealth for the benefit of workers, in accordance with the prices of basic services and products that today are far from our current purchasing power.
The referendum debates continue for hours at a time. Citizens are expressing their opinions on issues affecting their daily lives. Magali Pinillo believes the right to euthanasia or assisted suicide must also be included in the Constitution.
They must think about irreversible illnesses or people in so much suffering in which the patient asks for its own death. People should have that right.
Cubans have had lively debate and comment on various issues. Citizens are able to openly express their views on issues that will directly affect them.
This is not about political elites in power. This is about the people taking care of their countries and society's fate.
Members of the Constitutional Commission say the people play a very important role in the constitutional process.
It is very satisfying to see how every public space is used by people who studied the project. They share their thoughts and express their opinions about what must be changed. They are very eager to participate, and we will listen to their comments.
Apart from the Cubans living on the island, people from 120 other countries will also be able to take part in the debate. The people living abroad will be able to participate through the website of the government and the foreign ministry. The island's authorities said that this must respect everyone's opinion and calls everyone to participate regardless their current locations.
And it's Independence Day in Trinidad and Tobago. The 56th Independence Parade was held at the Queen's Park in Savannah in Port of Spain. This year's parade is the first for Trinidad and Tobago's first female president, Paula Maweeks. The country gained independence from Britain in 1962. And the Trinidad and Tobago government says it is prepared to pay close to $150 million in severance for workers affected by the Petro-Trin oil refinery closure. Government announced plans to close the 101-year-old refinery earlier this week. Workers over the age of 55 will receive an early retirement package. The package for the younger workers is still being worked out. There's no exact date set for the closure.
The figure will be huge. It will be large because, first and foremost, the base salary of Petro-Trin is big. So because any calculation obviously will have to be on base salary.
Are you talking about the hundreds of millions or $1 billion plus? You say huge.
I would say it will be significantly more than $1 billion. The termination benefits for the workers, the packages, could be in excess of $1 billion.
And that is to be paid by taxpayers, yes?
It's part of the cost structure of this reorganization. But that is a small figure compared to the hemorrhaging lost on an annual basis.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
And welcome back. Head of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk, Alexander Zakharchenko, has been killed in an explosion in eastern Ukraine. The 42-year-old was taken to the hospital shortly after the explosion, where he died of injuries. Local authorities, Minister of Finance, and 2 others were injured in the explosion. According to a local report, the explosive device was placed in a car near the cafe. And Palestinians resumed their Great March of Return protest near the Gaza border on Friday. At least 120 protesters were injured after Israeli forces deployed tear gas and reportedly used live ammunition to disperse crowds, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israeli forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets, while Palestinians responded with throwing rocks. And meanwhile, the United States has cut all its funding to the United Nations Palestine Refugee Agency, ending decades-long support. The move is being viewed as an assault on some 5 million Palestinians who stand to be affected. The Trump administration will cut $300 million from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. There have been reports that the U.S. government is also lobbying other countries to follow suit. Australian scientists have revealed a starfish-killing robot to save the Great Barrier Reef. To protect the Great Barrier Reef, scientists at the Queensland University of Technology have built a robot to hunt and kill crown-of-thorns starfish. The machine, dubbed RangerBot, can detect the coral-eating starfish species and inject it with a fatal mixture that is harmless for other reef creatures. The boat can also monitor vast areas, mapping the amount of coral bleaching, pest and invasive species, and pollution. And fans of Aretha Franklin are watching her funeral service from a big screen outside Greater Grace Temple in Detroit. Aretha Franklin's star-studded funeral got underway with political dignitaries and music royalty joining family, friends, and members of the public to bid goodbye to America's Queen of Soul. We've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.